The metal restraints bit into Marcus Webb's wrists as the transport shuddered through another dimensional jump. 3 months ago, he had been a simple mining engineer on Europa Station. Now he was cargo, bound for what the Zephyrians called their Grand Colosseum, somewhere in the Andromeda Spiral. The alien ship reeked of sulfur, and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Maybe fear, maybe death. The Zephyrian guards spoke in their clicking language, occasionally glancing at him with what he assumed was amusement. Their elongated heads bobbed as they chattered, their forearms gesturing wildly. Marcus had learned enough of their language during his captivity to understand fragments. They were excited, very excited, something about the human specimen and unprecedented entertainment value. The words made his stomach turn. Captain Velox, the ship's commander, approached his holding cell. The Zephyrian's skin was a mottled purple-green and his eyes were the color of old copper. When he spoke, his translator device rendered his words in flat, emotionless English. Human, you should feel honored. The consortium has selected you for a very special demonstration. Your species' reputation for tenacity has reached even our remote territories. Marcus met the alien's gaze without flinching. What kind of demonstration? Velox's mouth opened and what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of a smile. Rows of needle-sharp teeth gleamed in the dim light. The kind that will finally prove to the galaxy that humans are nothing more than clever animals. Entertaining perhaps, but ultimately disposable. The ship lurched again, and through the small porthole Marcus could see they were approaching something massive. A structure that defied comprehension stretched across space. Part station, part asteroid, part something else entirely. Ships from dozens of different species swarmed around it like insects around a hive. The Grand Colosseum, Velox announced with obvious pride. Built over 1,000 cycles ago, it has hosted the greatest spectacles in known space. Today it will host yours. Marcus had heard whispers about the Colosseum during his imprisonment. The Zephyrians and their allied species used it for their most elaborate entertainments. Usually it involved forcing conquered species to fight each other, or face various engineered monsters. The survival rate was approximately 0. What am I supposed to fight? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Velox's eyes brightened with malicious glee. Not what, human? Whom? The Drachmori have graciously provided 3 of their finest young warriors for today's exhibition. They are eager to test themselves against the legendary human resilience we have heard so much about. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. He had never seen a Drachmori, but every spacefarer in the galaxy had heard the stories. They were apex predators from a high-gravity world, standing nearly 12 feet tall with armored scales, razor-sharp claws, and intelligence that rivaled most sentient species. They were also, according to legend, completely without mercy. The Drachmori don't usually participate in arena combat, Marcus said, grasping for any hope. They consider it beneath them. Normally, yes, Velox agreed. But they are curious about humans. Your species has been making quite a stir in certain circles. Some foolish rumors about human ingenuity and determination have been circulating. The Drachmori young ones wish to see for themselves if there is any truth to these tales. The transport docked with a grinding mechanical sound that echoed through the hull. Marcus could hear the massive bay doors opening. And suddenly the ship was flooded with noise. The roar of crowds, the hum of machinery, and underneath it all, something that might have been music. Guards flanked Marcus as they marched him through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The walls were covered with trophies from previous exhibitions, weapons, armor pieces, and other things Marcus preferred not to examine too closely. Holographic displays showed highlights from past events, most of which ended with something being torn apart. They passed viewing lounges where various alien species watched the proceedings below. Marcus caught glimpses of the Tylani with their crystalline exoskeletons, the gas-breathing Nethoks in their environmental suits, and dozens of others he couldn't identify. All of them seemed excited about the upcoming show. The preparation chamber was sterile and cold. A Zephyrian technician attached monitoring devices to Marcus's body, while explaining in broken English that they wanted to track his vital signs for the audience's entertainment. Apparently, watching fear responses was almost as popular as watching the actual combat. "Do I get any weapons?" Marcus asked as they fitted him with what appeared to be basic arena clothing. Tough fabric that would provide minimal protection but maximum visibility for the cameras. "Weapons?" The technician's translator made a sound that might have been laughter. Human, you misunderstand the nature of this exhibition. This is not about combat prowess. This is about demonstrating the natural order of things. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Marcus was given water and a basic nutritional supplement. His last meal, most likely. Through the chamber's transparent wall, he could see into the arena proper. A massive circular space surrounded by tiers of seating that rose up into the shadows. The floor was sand, stained dark in places that Marcus tried not to think about. The Drachmori are already in position, announced another guard. They have been fasting for 3 days to ensure proper motivation. As Marcus was led toward the arena entrance, he caught sight of a massive display screen showing his biographical information. The crowd was learning about his mundane life as a mining engineer, his unremarkable service record, his complete lack of combat training. The Zephyrian commentator was making it clear that this was intended to be a very brief demonstration. The arena gates loomed before him, easily 20 feet tall and covered in warning symbols from a dozen different languages. Beyond them, Marcus could hear something that might have been breathing, though it sounded more like controlled thunder. Captain Velox appeared beside him one final time. Any last words for the recording, human? Something appropriately dramatic for the archives? Marcus looked at the alien commander, then at the gates, then at the thousands of beings in the stands who had come to watch him die for their amusement. He thought about his sister back on Earth, about the mining crews who depended on people like him to keep civilization running, about all the ordinary humans doing ordinary jobs that somehow kept the galaxy spinning. Tell them, Marcus said quietly, that they picked the wrong species to underestimate. The gates began to open, and the real show was about to begin. The arena sand was coarser than Marcus had expected, almost like ground glass beneath his bare feet. The moment he stepped through the gates, the crowd's roar hit him like a physical force. Thousands of beings from dozens of species filled the massive amphitheater, their various calls and cries blending into a cacophony that seemed to shake the very air. Above him, floating camera drones buzzed and circled, broadcasting his every movement to screens throughout the Colosseum and beyond. Marcus could see his own image reflected on the massive displays, a single human figure standing alone in an arena the size of a football stadium. The sand stretched out before him, marked by dark stains and gouges from previous exhibitions. In the center of the arena stood 3 raised platforms, each about 50 feet apart, and on those platforms, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The Drachmori were even more impressive in person than the stories had suggested. Each stood nearly 12 feet tall, their powerfully built frames covered in scales that seemed to shift color in the arena's artificial lighting, from deep emerald to midnight black to hints of gold. Their heads were elongated and reptilian, with eyes that burned like molten amber. Massive wings folded against their backs suggested they were capable of flight despite their size. But it wasn't their physical presence that made Marcus pause. It was their stillness. While the crowd screamed and cheered around them, the 3 Drachmori remained motionless on their platforms, watching him with an intensity that felt almost respectful. The arena's sound system crackled to life, and a Zephyrian announcer's voice boomed across the space. Marcus's translation implant rendered the words with mechanical precision. Citizens of the Consortium, today we witness a demonstration of natural law. The human specimen will face 3 of the Drachmori's finest young warriors in single combat. The outcome will finally settle the ridiculous rumors about human tenacity that have been spreading through certain sectors. The crowd cheered louder, waving various appendages and making sounds that hurt Marcus's ears. He noticed that betting displays had appeared throughout the stands, showing odds that were heavily weighted against his survival. No surprises there. The Drachmori participants are Thais, Morok, and Zenth, each a proven hunter from the crystal peaks of Drachmor Prime. They have volunteered for this exhibition to satisfy their curiosity about the human species. As their names were announced, each Drachmori raised their head slightly, acknowledging the crowd. Their movements were fluid and controlled like dancers or martial artists. Marcus began to suspect that calling them dragons was more accurate than he had initially thought. Combat will commence when the human reaches the center circle, the announcer continued. Standard arena rules apply. Combat continues until one side can no longer fight. Marcus looked at the center circle, marked in the sand about 200 feet from his current position. The 3 Drachmori were positioned at equal distances around it, forming a triangle. Simple mathematics told him they could reach the circle long before he could, which meant the moment he started moving, he would be committed to whatever was about to happen. He began walking forward, his feet sinking slightly into the sand with each step. The crowd's noise seemed to fade as he focused on the three massive figures ahead of him. Their amber eyes tracked his movement, but none of them shifted position. 50 feet from the circle, Marcus noticed something odd. The Drekmori weren't preparing to attack. They weren't spreading out to flank him, weren't lowering into combat stances, weren't doing any of the things he would expect from predators about to pounce on prey. Instead, they were studying him. 25 feet from the circle, Marcus could see details in their faces. Intelligence blazed in those amber eyes, but also something else. Recognition? Curiosity? It was impossible to tell. He stepped into the center circle. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the explosion of violence they had paid to see. The betting displays flickered, updating final odds. Camera drones swooped closer to capture every detail of what was expected to be a very brief and brutal encounter. But the Drekmori still didn't move. Thys, the largest of the three, tilted his massive head slightly to one side. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying clearly across the arena even though he hadn't raised it. The translation came through Marcus's implant a moment later. "You are smaller than we expected, human." Marcus found his voice. "Sorry to disappoint you. You misunderstand," Morok said from the left. "We did not say we were disappointed." The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't how arena exhibitions were supposed to go. Where was the immediate attack? Where was the blood? Zenth, the youngest looking of the three, spread his wings slightly, not in a threatening gesture, but almost as if he were trying to get a better look at Marcus. "The stories say your kind are builders, creators, that you take dead worlds and make them live again." "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, not sure where this conversation was heading. "That's what we do. And that you never surrender even when victory is impossible." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't simple arena fighters. They knew things about humanity that he wouldn't have expected from creatures supposedly interested only in testing their combat skills. The arena's sound system crackled again, and Marcus could hear Captain Velox's voice, though it wasn't being translated for the general audience. "What are they doing?" "The human should be dead by now," another voice, possibly the arena's director. "The Drekmori are experienced fighters. Perhaps they are simply playing with their prey." But Marcus could see the confusion spreading through the stands. The betting displays had stopped updating. Camera drones were hovering uncertainly, as if their operators weren't sure what to focus on. Thys took a step forward, his massive claws leaving deep gouges in the sand. But instead of attacking, he lowered his great head until he was looking directly into Marcus's eyes from only a few feet away. "We have heard other stories as well, human. Stories that your people do not abandon their own, that you will fight impossible odds to save even one of your number. That's generally true," Marcus said carefully, "and that when faced with extinction, your kind does not simply accept death. You rage against it. You find ways to survive that no one else would consider." The crowd was becoming restless. Shouts and calls were echoing from the stands, demanding action. But the three Drekmori seemed oblivious to everything except their conversation with Marcus. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. Morok answered, "Because we have also heard that your kind values honor, that you keep your word, even when it costs you dearly, and that you remember your friends," Zenth added quietly. Marcus felt the conversation had moved far beyond what anyone in the arena had expected. The three massive creatures before him weren't behaving like the mindless predators the Zephyrians had described. They were talking to him like they were testing him for something. "There is a question we must ask you, human," Thys said, his voice carrying a weight that made the arena's artificial lighting seem to dim. "Your answer will determine what happens next." The crowd's murmur had become an angry buzz. Marcus could see Zephyrian officials gesturing frantically in their control booth, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage their exhibition. "Ask your question," Marcus said. Thys straightened to his full height, his massive form casting a shadow across the center circle. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the arena. "Human Marcus Webb of Terra, if we were to offer you alliance instead of combat, if we were to offer you friendship instead of enmity, Would your kind remember that choice when the dark times come? The arena fell completely silent. Even the background hum of machinery seemed to fade. Marcus realized that somehow impossibly everything had changed. This wasn't about entertainment anymore. This was about something much bigger. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, 3 massive Drachmori surrounding him, while tens of thousands of alien spectators waited for his answer. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Somehow, a simple gladiatorial exhibition had become something else entirely. He looked into Theis's burning amber eyes and saw something he hadn't expected to find in an arena designed for death. Hope. You're asking me to speak for my entire species, Marcus said carefully. I'm just a mining engineer. I fix broken equipment and make sure ore processors don't explode. And yet, Morok rumbled from his left. You speak for them now. Marcus could hear angry voices from the control booth high above the arena. The Zephyrian officials were clearly discussing whether to intervene, but they seemed as confused as everyone else about what was happening. Yes, Marcus said simply, humans remember their friends, and we never forget those who stood with us when we needed them most. The response was immediate and stunning. This, all 12 feet and several tons of apex predator, slowly lowered himself until one massive knee touched the arena sand. His great head bowed, and his wings folded tight against his back in a gesture that was unmistakably one of respect. A heartbeat later, Morok and Zenth followed suit. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then, as the reality of what had just happened sank in, the arena exploded into chaos. The crowd erupted in shouts and cries of outrage, confusion, and disbelief. Betting displays went haywire as operators tried to figure out how to handle wagers on an outcome that had never been contemplated. Camera drones swooped and circled frantically, broadcasting images that were already spreading across the galaxy's communication networks. But in the center of it all, 3 of the most feared warriors in known space knelt before a human mining engineer. What have you done? Marcus whispered. What needed to be done? This replied without raising his head. For longer than you know, we have watched your kind. We have seen what others refuse to see. The arena's communication system crackled with overlapping voices as various officials tried to regain control of the situation. Marcus caught fragments through his translator. Unprecedented violation of arena protocols. Complete breakdown of established hierarchy. Cancel the broadcast immediately. But it was too late. The images were already spreading through the galactic network faster than they could be contained. Stand up, Marcus said urgently. You don't need to kneel to me. We do not kneel to you alone, human, Zenth said, finally raising his head. We kneel to what your species represents. High above them, Captain Velox's voice boomed through the arena speakers, his translated words dripping with fury. This exhibition is terminated. Arena security will restore order immediately. Massive blast doors began opening around the arena's perimeter, and armed guards started pouring in. But they moved cautiously, clearly uncertain about how to handle 3 uninjured Drachmori, who had apparently decided to become allies of their intended victim. We must leave this place, Morok said, rising to his feet. But first, there are things you must understand. The consortium believes they rule through strength, Theis explained as he also stood. They maintain order by demonstrating that resistance is futile, that any species that defies them will be crushed. But they have never faced humanity directly, Zenth added. They have only heard stories, and they dismissed those stories as exaggeration. Marcus watched the approaching guards and realized the situation was about to become very dangerous very quickly. What kind of stories? Of your wars, this said grimly. Of battles where your kind fought against impossible odds and found ways to win. Of sieges that should have lasted days stretching into years because humans refused to surrender. Of single individuals holding positions against entire armies. Stories of ships limping home on emergency power after taking damage that should have destroyed them. Morok continued. Of colonies surviving in conditions that would kill most species. Of your kind treating survival not as a goal, but as a baseline expectation. The guards were getting closer, and Marcus could see that they were carrying weapons designed for large predators. Stun nets, energy lances, and what looked like portable force cages. The consortium fears what they do not understand, Zenth said, and they do not understand that there is a difference between strength and power. Strength can be broken, Theis explained. Power can be overcome, but will is different. Will is what drives your miners to work in conditions that would terrify our greatest warriors. Will is what makes your kind look at a dead world and see a garden waiting to be planted. Marcus felt a strange pride rising in his chest, mixed with confusion about why these magnificent creatures saw something in humanity that he had never considered. Remarkable, the Drakmori have survived for millennia by choosing our battles carefully, Morok said. We do not ally ourselves with the weak or the foolish. And we do not ally ourselves with those who will not remember their debts, Zenth added meaningfully. The first of the security guards had reached weapons range, and Marcus could see them preparing to deploy their capture equipment. But then something unexpected happened. The 3 Drakmori spread their wings. The effect was breathtaking. Each wingspan was at least 30 feet from tip to tip, and when fully extended they created a living barrier between Marcus and the approaching guards. The scales on their wings caught the arena's lights and threw back reflections like fractured rainbows. "Last warning," shouted the guard commander through a loudspeaker. "Return to your designated positions immediately." This turned his great head toward the approaching security force. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the arena without any need for amplification. "We decline." The simple statement sent another wave of shock through the crowd. Drakmori didn't decline orders from consortium officials. Drakmori were supposed to be controllable, predictable, useful for exactly this kind of display. "You have 5 seconds to comply or face the consequences," the commander shouted. "Commander," Zenth called back, his voice almost conversational. "How many of your guards have families?" The question was so unexpected that the entire security force actually paused. "Because," Morok continued calmly, "we would prefer not to make any orphans today." Marcus realized that the 3 Drakmori weren't just creating a barrier between him and the guards. They were creating a statement, a declaration that the established order had just fundamentally changed. "The exhibition is over," Thais announced, his words carrying to every corner of the arena. "Let all who witness this moment remember, the Drakmori choose their own allies." He looked down at Marcus with those burning amber eyes. "And we have chosen." The arena erupted into chaos once again, but this time it was different. This time, Marcus could hear something new in the voices of the crowd. Uncertainty. Fear. The realization that the galaxy's most predictable species had just done something completely unpredictable. And in that moment, Marcus understood that he was no longer just a prisoner scheduled for execution. He had become something much more dangerous to the consortium's carefully maintained order. He had become a symbol. The standoff in the arena stretched into tense minutes as consortium security forces surrounded the center circle, but maintained their distance. The 3 Drakmori had created an impenetrable barrier around Marcus, their massive wings forming a wall of scale and sinew that no guard seemed eager to test. High above in the control booth, Marcus could see frantic activity. Zephyrian officials gestured wildly at screens and communication devices, clearly trying to manage a crisis that had spiraled far beyond their control. The betting displays had shut down entirely, and several of the luxury viewing boxes were emptying as nervous alien dignitaries decided they wanted to be elsewhere. Captain Velox's voice cut through the arena's speakers again, but this time his tone had changed from fury to something approaching diplomatic caution. "Honored Drakmori warriors, surely there has been some misunderstanding. The human is a convicted prisoner, scheduled for lawful execution under consortium regulations. Your interference violates several interspecies treaties." Thais didn't even look toward the control booth as he responded. "Captain Velox, we are familiar with consortium law. We are also familiar with Drakmori law. Under our customs, we may claim any being as battle brother if they prove themselves worthy in combat." "But there was no combat," Velox protested. "Incorrect," Morok rumbled. "The human faced 3 Drakmori warriors in single combat and emerged victorious." Marcus blinked in confusion. "I didn't fight anyone." "You stood your ground when facing certain death," Zenth explained quietly. "You answered our questions with honesty instead of attempting deception. You showed no fear, made no attempt to beg for mercy, and when offered alliance, you gave your word without hesitation." The young Drakmori's amber eyes met his. "In our culture, that is the highest form of combat there is." Around the arena, the crowd had largely fallen silent, though Marcus could see groups of different species huddled in heated discussions. Camera drones continued to circle, broadcasting the unprecedented scene to news networks across the galaxy. This is causing considerable diplomatic complications, came a new voice from the control booth. Marcus's translator identified it as belonging to a Tylani official, their crystalline vocal cords giving their words a musical quality even through the mechanical rendering. The Drakmori homeworld has already filed formal protest with the Consortium Council, the Tylani continued. They claim this exhibition violated the Treaty of Mutual Respect by using their citizens for what they term degrading entertainment. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. This wasn't just about him anymore. The Drakmori hadn't simply chosen to spare one human. They had used this moment to challenge the entire structure of Consortium authority. Furthermore, the Tylani official continued, initial reports suggest that similar protests are being filed by 17 other member species. The arena broadcasts appear to have triggered some sort of coordinated response. Captain Velox's angry chittering came through clearly even without translation. When he spoke again, his words were carefully controlled. The Consortium is prepared to negotiate. Return the human to custody and we can discuss appropriate compensation for any cultural misunderstandings that may have occurred. No, Thais said simply. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. No, Velox repeated as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. The human is now under Drakmori protection, Morok explained. According to the treaties you yourself cited, we have the right to extend such protection to any being we choose. Marcus realized that the three warriors had outmaneuvered the Consortium using their own laws. But he also realized that this couldn't end well for anyone involved. They'll never let us leave, he said quietly. They cannot prevent us from leaving, Zenth replied with absolute confidence. The Consortium may control many things, but they do not control Drakmori airspace. As if summoned by his words, a deep rumbling began to echo through the arena. At first, Marcus thought it might be some kind of mechanical system, but then he realized the sound was coming from outside. And it was getting louder. The arena's main display screens flickered and switched to external views. What Marcus saw made his breath catch in his throat. Ships were arriving. Not just any ships, Drakmori warships. Their organic curves and scale-like armor plates immediately recognizable, even to someone with Marcus's limited knowledge of spacecraft design. They moved through space with the fluid grace of their creators, and they were massive. How many? He whispered. Currently 17 battle cruisers and 43 escort frigates, Thys replied calmly, apparently receiving updates through some form of communication Marcus couldn't detect. More are en route. The arena's crowd had noticed the displays now, and panic was beginning to spread through the stands. Alien species who had come to watch a simple execution were suddenly faced with the possibility of being caught in an interstellar incident. This is madness, Velox's voice cracked with stress. You would risk war over a single human? We risk nothing, Captain, Morok responded. We are simply exercising our rights under galactic law. You, however, appear to be in violation of several accords regarding the treatment of our citizens. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was happening. Why, he asked the three Drakmori. Why are you doing this for me? Not for you alone, Thys explained patiently. For what you represent. For the alliance we hope to build. Your species stands at a crossroads, human, Zenth added. The Consortium seeks to control you through fear and intimidation, as they have controlled so many others. But we have studied your history. We know what happens when your kind is pushed too far. Through the arena's speakers, Marcus could hear rapid conversations in several languages as various officials tried to find a way out of the crisis. The Tylani diplomats seemed to be acting as a mediator, but even their musical voice carried notes of strain. The Drakmori fleet is requesting immediate clearance for landing operations, came an announcement from what sounded like the station's traffic control. They claim they are here to collect their citizens and honored guest. Denied, Velox shouted. No unauthorized landings will be permitted. Captain, the Tylani diplomat interrupted. I should point out that the Drakmori have not made a request. They have filed a formal notice of intent. Under Article 7 of the Station Safety Protocols, they have the right to retrieve their citizens from any situation they deem dangerous. But the human isn't a Drakmori citizen. No, Thys said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. But he is our honored guest, and under our law that grants him the same protections. Marcus watched as more ships appeared on the display screens. The Drakmori fleet was growing by the minute, and he could see smaller vessels beginning to launch from the larger warships. They're sending shuttles, he observed. Transport for our departure, Morok confirmed. Around them, the security forces were backing away, clearly unwilling to risk a confrontation with 3 Drakmori warriors, who now had significant backup en route. This cannot be allowed to stand, Velox declared, but his voice had lost most of its authority. The consortium will not be dictated to by. His words were cut off as every speaker in the arena began broadcasting a new voice. It was deeper than any of the 3 Drakmori with Marcus, older and carrying the weight of absolute authority. This is Fleet Commander Azroth of the Drakmori 3rd Battle Group. Captain Velox, you will stand down immediately and prepare to receive our diplomatic envoy. Any interference with our lawful operations will be considered an act of aggression. The arena fell completely silent. Marcus could see Zephyrian officials in the control booth frantically consulting what looked like legal databases and treaty documents. It appears, the Tylani diplomat announced with what might have been relief, that we have entered formal diplomatic proceedings. All arena operations are hereby suspended pending resolution of these jurisdictional questions. Theiss looked down at Marcus with something that might have been amusement in his amber eyes. Welcome to the beginning of a new age, human. The galaxy is about to discover what it means when the Drakmori choose sides. In the distance, the rumble of approaching shuttles grew louder. The Drakmori shuttle settled onto the arena floor with surprising grace for something the size of a small building. Its organic curves and scale-textured hull made it look more grown than built. And when the boarding ramp extended, it moved with the fluid motion of a living creature. Marcus found himself walking up that ramp flanked by Thys, Morok, and Zenth, while behind them the arena remained in chaos. Consortium security forces had pulled back to safe distances, clearly unwilling to risk an incident that might trigger a shooting war. Inside the shuttle, Marcus discovered that Drakmori technology was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse with a gentle bioluminescence, and the controls appeared to be living interfaces that responded to touch with subtle changes in color and texture. Fascinating, isn't it? Asked a new voice. Marcus turned to see another Drakmori approaching, older than his 3 companions, with scales that had faded to a deep bronze color and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. Marcus Webb, Thys said formally. May I present Senior Flight Commander Vareth? She will be escorting us to the fleet. The honor is mine, human, Vareth said, inclining her great head slightly. Your actions today have set in motion events that will reshape the galaxy's balance of power. I didn't do anything, Marcus protested as the shuttle lifted off. Through the transparent walls, he could see the arena growing smaller below them. I just answered some questions. You gave your word, Vareth replied. To many species, words are simply sounds. To humans, we have learned, they are binding contracts written in honor. As they rose through the station's superstructure, Marcus caught glimpses of other shuttles departing, some carrying alien dignitaries who were clearly eager to distance themselves from the developing crisis, others heading toward the growing Drakmori fleet. How did you know to bring so many ships? Marcus asked. We didn't, Vareth admitted. The fleet was already assembled for other purposes. When young Theiss and his companions volunteered for this exhibition, we thought it might provide useful intelligence about consortium military capabilities. Instead, Zenth added with something that might have been amusement, we discovered something far more valuable. Through the shuttle's walls, Marcus could see they were approaching one of the massive Drakmori warships. The vessel was easily a kilometer long, its hull covered in what looked like actual scales that shifted and moved as if the ship were breathing. The Eternal Wing, Vareth announced as they approached a docking bay that opened like a mouth to receive them. Flagship of our 3rd battle group, and my home for the past 40 cycles. The docking process was remarkably smooth, and within minutes Marcus found himself walking through corridors that seemed more like the interior of some vast creature than a mechanical spacecraft. Bioluminescent strips provided gentle lighting, and the air carried the faint scent of something he couldn't identify, perhaps the Drakmori equivalent of flowers. Your quarters are prepared, Vareth told him as they walked. But first there is someone who wishes to meet you. They entered what appeared to be a command center, though it bore no resemblance to the sterile bridge of a human ship. Here, Drakmori crew members worked at living interfaces, their movements flowing and organic. At the center of it all stood a figure that made even Thys seem small by comparison. Fleet Commander Azeroth, Vareth announced, our honored guest. Azeroth was ancient by any standard Marcus could imagine. His scales had deepened to an almost black color, shot through with veins of silver that seemed to pulse with their own light. When he moved, it was with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that every gesture carried weight. Marcus Webb of Earth, Azeroth said, his voice carrying the depth of centuries. Welcome aboard the Eternal Wing. Thank you for rescuing me, Marcus replied, feeling somewhat inadequate to the situation. We have not rescued you, human. We have recruited you. Azeroth's amber eyes seemed to look right through him. Tell me, what do you know of the Consortium's true nature? Marcus considered the question carefully. They seem to control most of the known galaxy through a combination of economic pressure and military force. They maintain order by demonstrating that resistance is futile. A reasonable assessment, Azeroth agreed, but incomplete. The Consortium doesn't simply rule through strength, they rule through despair. They ensure that every species under their control believes that cooperation is the only path to survival. Around them, Marcus could see crew members monitoring various displays showing the situation around the Colosseum. More ships were arriving, not just Drakmori vessels now, but craft from a dozen different species. For centuries, Azeroth continued, we have watched species after species submit to Consortium authority. Some fought briefly and were crushed. Others simply accepted their fate without resistance. All of them eventually came to believe that the Consortium's power was absolute. But humans are different, Thys interjected. Your people don't accept absolutes. Marcus felt a strange pride rising in his chest. We're stubborn, I'll give you that. More than stubborn, Morok said. Transformative. Everywhere your species goes, you change things. You take what exists and make it better. Your mining operations are a perfect example, Vareth added. Most species extract resources and move on. Humans extract resources and leave behind infrastructure that improves the entire system. Azeroth gestured toward one of the displays, which showed a tactical overview of the growing fleet around the Colosseum. 18 species have sent representatives in the past 6 hours. All of them want to know what the Drakmori have discovered about humanity that makes us willing to risk war over a single individual. And what have you discovered? Marcus asked. That your species represents hope, Azeroth replied simply, not just for yourselves, but for everyone trapped under the Consortium's rule. The display shifted to show communication logs, thousands of messages flowing between ships, stations and planets across the galaxy. Marcus could see priority flags marking discussions between various government officials, military commanders, and what appeared to be underground resistance movements. Word of today's events is spreading faster than the Consortium can contain it, Vareth explained. For the first time in generations, subjugated species are seeing someone stand up to Consortium authority and not only survive, but prevail. We didn't prevail, Marcus protested. You did. I was just there. You were the catalyst, Azeroth corrected. Without your presence, today would have been just another arena exhibition. With it, today becomes the moment when the galaxy learned that the Consortium can be defied. Through the ship's communication system, Marcus could hear reports coming in from across known space. Labor strikes on mining worlds, delayed shipments of critical resources, spontaneous demonstrations on a dozen different planets. The ripple effects of what had happened in the arena were spreading outward like waves from a dropped stone. The Consortium is demanding that we return you immediately, Zenth reported, monitoring one of the communication channels. They're claiming that harboring you violates 17 different treaties. Let them claim, Azeroth rumbled. We have legal scholars who can cite 43 treaties that give us the right to protect you. But this can't end well, Marcus said, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. You're talking about war. Millions of people could die. Millions are already dying, Vareth replied quietly. They die slowly of despair and hopelessness, on worlds where the Consortium has convinced them that submission is their only option. Azeroth moved to stand before one of the large displays, which now showed a star map of the local sector. Consortium territories were marked in one color, independent systems in another, and disputed regions in a third. For too long, the Drakmori have remained neutral, he said. We told ourselves that we were maintaining the balance of power, preventing any one faction from becoming too dominant. But neutrality in the face of oppression is just another form of collaboration. And now? Marcus asked. Azeroth turned to look at him with those ancient amber eyes. Now we have found something worth fighting for. A species that proves the Consortium's fundamental assumption, that resistance is futile, is wrong. Your people don't just resist, This added. You overcome. You find ways to win that no one else would consider. Through the ship's communication system, a new priority alert chimed. The duty officer's voice carried clearly through the command center. Fleet Commander, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's marked as an official response from the Terran Colonial Authority. Azeroth's eyes brightened with interest. Put it through! The display shifted to show a familiar blue marble hanging in space, Earth, Marcus's homeworld. The transmission that followed would change everything yet again. The transmission from Earth crackled to life on the main display, and Marcus found himself looking at a face he recognized from news broadcasts. Admiral Sarah Chen, head of the Terran Colonial Authority's military operations. Her expression was grim, but determined. Fleet Commander Azeroth, she began without preamble. I am Admiral Chen of the Terran Colonial Authority. We have been monitoring the situation at the Grand Coliseum through your public broadcasts. Azeroth inclined his massive head respectfully. Admiral Chen, your citizen Marcus Webb has conducted himself with honor. So we observed, Chen replied. Mr. Webb, are you unharmed? Marcus stepped forward, feeling surreal about conducting interstellar diplomacy in his arena clothes. I'm fine, Admiral. The Drakmori have treated me with nothing but respect. Good. Chen's attention returned to Azeroth. Fleet Commander, we need to discuss the situation frankly. The Consortium has contacted us through official channels, demanding Mr. Webb's immediate return. They claim he was lawfully detained and that your actions constitute an act of aggression. And your response? Azeroth asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Chen's smile was cold as space. I told them that Terran citizens are under the protection of the Terran Colonial Authority, regardless of where they might find themselves. If the Consortium has legal grievances, they can file them through proper diplomatic channels. Around the command center, Marcus could see Drakmori crew members exchanging glances. Whatever they had expected from Earth's government, this level of direct support clearly pleased them. However, Chen continued, I also need to inform you that the situation has developed significantly since your broadcast began. 3 Consortium battle fleets are currently moving toward your position. Their estimated arrival time is 18 hours. We are aware, Azeroth replied calmly. Our long-range sensors detected their departure 4 hours ago. Then you're also aware that they're bringing enough firepower to level this entire sector, Chen said bluntly. Fleet Commander, while we appreciate your protection of our citizen, we cannot allow this situation to escalate into a full-scale war. Marcus felt his heart sink. Earth was going to abandon him to prevent a larger conflict. It made perfect sense from a strategic standpoint, but it still hurt. Which is why, Chen continued, the Terran Colonial Authority is dispatching our own fleet to assist you. The command center fell silent. Marcus stared at the display, certain he had misheard. Admiral, Azeroth said carefully, while we welcome Terran support, you should understand that your forces would be significantly outnumbered. Chen's smile turned predatory. Fleet Commander, you've been monitoring our transmissions for months, but I don't think you fully understand what you've been seeing. Our mining operations and colonial expansion have been somewhat more extensive than our public reports indicated. The display shifted to show a tactical overview that made Marcus's breath catch. Ships were moving throughout human space, not the small patrol vessels and cargo haulers he had expected, but massive warships emerging from hidden bases and supposedly peaceful mining stations. 47 heavy cruisers, 93 destroyers, and over 200 support vessels, Chen announced. Plus our new planetary defense platforms, which turn out to be quite mobile when necessary. How? Vareth whispered. Humans don't just build infrastructure, Chen explained. We build redundant infrastructure. Every mining operation includes defensive installations. Every colony ship carries enough equipment to establish industrial facilities. Every peaceful exploration mission Includes enough firepower to defend itself against anything it might encounter. Marcus realized he was witnessing the revelation of a military buildup that had been decades in the making. Humanity hadn't just been expanding into space, they had been quietly preparing for exactly this kind of situation. The consortium assumed that a young species would be easy to control, Chen continued. They failed to account for the fact that young species can also be very paranoid. Through the ship's communication system, status reports began flowing in. The Drakmori weren't the only ones who had been busy. Ships from 18 different species were converging on the Colosseum, and most of them were broadcasting messages of support for the Drakmori Human Alliance. It appears, Azeroth observed, that your presence has accomplished something we never anticipated. Mr. Webb, you have given the galaxy's oppressed species a rallying point. This is getting out of hand, Marcus said, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what was happening. All I did was answer some questions. You did more than that, Thais said quietly. You proved that the consortium's power isn't absolute, that their carefully maintained system of control has cracks. Admiral Chen's image leaned forward on the display. Mr. Webb, I need you to understand something. The consortium has been pressuring humanity for years, trying to force us into their economic system under increasingly unfavorable terms. They assumed we would eventually submit because we're a young species without significant allies. They miscalculated, Morok rumbled approvingly. Severely, Chen agreed. What happened today wasn't just an arena exhibition gone wrong. It was the spark that lit a fire we've been building for a very long time. The tactical display updated again, showing new movements. The approaching consortium fleets had slowed their advance, apparently reconsidering their approach in light of the growing opposition force. Fleet Commander, Chen addressed Azeroth. The Terran Colonial Authority formally requests permission to coordinate our defense with your forces. Permission granted with honor, Admiral, Azeroth replied immediately. It would be our privilege to fight alongside humanity. Around the command center, Marcus could see crew members working with increased intensity. Display screens showed communication channels opening with the other ships that had joined the growing fleet, and tactical assessments of the approaching consortium forces. There's something else, Chen said, her expression becoming even more serious. Our intelligence networks have been monitoring consortium communications. This isn't just about retrieving one human prisoner anymore. They're treating this as a test case. What kind of test? Marcus asked. They want to see if they can crush this alliance before it grows stronger, Chen explained. If they can defeat the combined Drakmori human fleet here, they can point to it as proof that resistance to their authority will always fail. And if they can't? Vareth asked. Then species across the galaxy will start believing that the consortium can be beaten, Chen replied. The psychological impact would undermine their entire system of control. Azeroth moved to the central tactical display, his ancient eyes studying the positioning of forces throughout the sector. Admiral Chen, how many ships can you have in position within 12 hours? 37 heavy vessels, with more arriving every hour after that, Chen replied. But Fleet Commander, I need to be clear about something. If we make this stand, there's no going back. The consortium will never let us retreat to the status quo. Good, Azeroth said simply. The status quo was unacceptable. Marcus found himself at the center of a developing battle that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Ships from dozens of species were converging on their position, while the largest military force in known space was approaching with the intent to crush them all. Fleet Commander, the duty officer announced, we're receiving a priority transmission from the consortium flagship. They're demanding to speak with you directly. Azeroth's eyes glowed with anticipation. Put them through. It's time the consortium learned what it means to face a united galaxy. The main display shifted again, and for the first time, Marcus found himself looking at the beings who had ordered his execution and sparked a war. It was time for the final confrontation to begin. The consortium flagship appeared on the main display in all its imposing grandeur, a massive dreadnought built for intimidation as much as warfare. Its angular hull bristled with weapon systems, and its dark surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The figure who appeared on screen was exactly what Marcus had expected from the consortium's leadership. Grand Admiral Keth was a Zephyrian, but unlike Captain Velox, his modifications were extensive. Cybernetic implants covered much of his head, and his forearms ended in mechanical appendages that clicked and whirred as he moved. Fleet Commander Azeroth, Keth began, his voice rendered flat and emotionless by his translation systems. You are in violation of 17 galactic statutes and 43 interspecies treaties. Return the human prisoner and disperse your fleet immediately. Grand Admiral, Azeroth replied with perfect courtesy, we are in violation of nothing. The human Marcus Webb is under Drakmori protection as our honored guest. Your attempted execution of an innocent being, however, violates numerous laws regarding prisoner treatment. Keth's mechanical fingers drummed against his command chair. The human was lawfully detained following his capture in Consortium space. His execution was scheduled under proper judicial authority. Whose authority? Admiral Chen's voice cut through from Earth's transmission channel. The Terran Colonial Authority received no notification of charges, no opportunity to provide legal representation, and no chance to verify the legitimacy of the proceedings. The Grand Admiral's attention shifted to Chen's image. Admiral Chen, I had hoped humanity would show more wisdom than to involve itself in this matter. Wisdom? Chen's laugh was cold. Grand Admiral, you kidnapped one of our citizens, sentenced him to death without trial, and turned his execution into entertainment. We consider that an act of war. Around the Eternal Wings Command Center, Marcus could see status updates flowing in from across the sector. The Allied fleet now numbered over 400 ships from 26 different species. The Consortium force was larger, nearly 1,000 vessels, but they had clearly not expected this level of organized resistance. This ends now, Keth declared. You have 1 hour to return the human and disperse. After that, we will take whatever actions are necessary to restore order. Grand Admiral, Azeroth said quietly, I believe you have misunderstood the situation. Have I? The main display shifted to show the tactical overview of local space. The Allied fleet had positioned itself in a defensive formation around the Colosseum, but something was different. Ships were moving with a coordination that suggested extensive planning rather than hasty improvisation. For decades, Azeroth continued, the Consortium has maintained control through the illusion of absolute power. You convinced the galaxy that resistance was futile by ensuring that any rebellion remained isolated and could be crushed individually. An effective strategy, Keth admitted. Indeed, but strategies can become obsolete. Azeroth gestured toward the tactical display. Today you face something new. Not a rebellion of one species, but an alliance of many. Marcus watched as the display updated with new information. More ships were arriving every hour. Not just military vessels, but cargo haulers, mining ships, and civilian craft. Entire species were committing everything they had to this confrontation. You cannot possibly believe you can defeat the full might of the Consortium, Keth said, but Marcus caught a note of uncertainty in his mechanical voice. Perhaps not, Admiral Chen interjected, but we don't need to defeat you everywhere. We only need to defeat you here. The tactical display zoomed out to show the broader strategic picture. The Consortium had committed 3 full battle fleets to this engagement, nearly a third of their total military strength. If those fleets were destroyed or forced to retreat, the psychological impact would be devastating. Furthermore, Chen continued, our intelligence indicates that 17 Consortium member species have refused to provide ships for this engagement. It seems your authority isn't quite as absolute as you believed. Keth's mechanical appendages clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation Marcus had learned. Those species will be dealt with appropriately, will they? Thais spoke for the first time during the conversation. And how many more species will refuse to cooperate after they see what happens here? The Grand Admiral fell silent, apparently realizing that he was facing something the Consortium had never encountered before. United resistance backed by credible military force. There is another option, Azeroth said calmly. The Consortium could withdraw its fleets and agree to negotiate a new set of galactic accords. One that recognizes the sovereignty of member species and establishes fair terms for trade and cooperation. The Consortium does not negotiate with terrorists, Keth replied automatically. We are not terrorists, Marcus found himself saying. We're just people who refuse to be enslaved. The Grand Admiral's attention focused on him for the first time. The human speaks. Tell me, Marcus Webb of Earth, do you understand what you have caused? The chaos that will result from the collapse of galactic order? Marcus felt the weight of thousands of years of galactic history pressing down on him. But he also remembered his promise to the Drakmori and the hope he had seen in the eyes of beings from dozens of different species. I understand that your idea of order requires some people to accept that their lives have no value, Marcus replied. I understand that your peace depends on entire species giving up their freedom to avoid being destroyed. And I understand that you think that's acceptable because it's convenient for you, and you believe your way is better. Marcus looked around the command center at the Drakmori crew members who had risked everything to protect him, thought about Admiral Chen mobilizing Earth's hidden fleets, remembered the dozens of species that had joined their cause. I believe in a galaxy where people get to choose their own destinies, he said simply. Where being strong doesn't give you the right to oppress the weak. Where diversity is celebrated instead of controlled. Keth's image flickered as if the transmission was being interfered with, but Marcus realized it was probably just the Grand Admiral's cybernetic systems processing what he had heard. You offer chaos, Keth said finally. We offer freedom, Azroth corrected. The choice is yours, Grand Admiral. Withdraw your fleets and we can discuss the future. Attack us and face the consequences. For long moments the transmission carried only silence. Marcus could see Keth consulting with other figures who remained off camera, their voices too low to be picked up by the communication system. Finally, the Grand Admiral spoke again. You have forced our hand. The consortium fleet will advance in 1 hour. Prepare to face the full consequences of your rebellion. The transmission cut off. Around the command center, the mood shifted immediately from diplomatic tension to combat preparation. Status reports flowed in from across the Allied fleet, and Marcus could see defensive formations adjusting as ships moved into optimal positions. Well, Admiral Chen observed from Earth. I suppose that settles the matter. Indeed, Azroth agreed. Signal all ships, prepare for battle. But as the hour passed, something unexpected happened. The consortium fleet began to advance as promised, but their formation was ragged. Ships were breaking away from the main group, accelerating toward the edge of the system. Within 30 minutes, nearly 200 vessels had departed. It appears, Vareth reported with satisfaction, that not all consortium crews are willing to die for Grand Admiral Keth's vision of order. When the battle finally came, it was not the overwhelming assault the consortium had planned. Facing a united galaxy for the first time in their history, they discovered that their system of control had depended more on fear than loyalty. The engagement lasted less than 4 hours. By the end, the consortium fleet was retreating on all fronts, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again accept the illusion of absolute authority. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of Europa Station, watching Earth rise above the horizon. The Galactic Accords had been signed 3 weeks earlier, establishing a new system of governance based on voluntary cooperation rather than imposed control. The Drakmori had become humanity's closest allies, and together they had helped dozens of former consortium species establish their independence. The galaxy was messier now, more chaotic, but also more alive. Thais approached from behind, his massive form moving with the fluid grace Marcus had come to associate with his people. Any regrets, Marcus Webb? The Drakmori asked. Marcus thought about the question seriously. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of conflicts and challenges, but it was also full of possibilities that hadn't existed when every decision was made by a distant consortium bureaucracy. No, he said finally. No regrets. Good, Thais replied. Because we have received reports of a species called the Void Hunters operating beyond the galactic rim. They appear to be even more aggressive than the consortium was. Marcus turned to look at his friend with a grin. Are you asking for humanity's help with another impossible situation? Would we ask anyone else? As they watched Earth turn slowly in the void, Marcus reflected on how a simple mining engineer's promise to remember his friends had somehow changed the balance of power in the galaxy. It seemed impossible, but then again, humans had always specialized.